Ciliates also have what are called contractile vacuoles, and the name is telling you what it's doing. Contractile means to squeeze, and this is a vacuole, this is a space. In any type of organism that lives in the water, it has to have some means of expelling the water because water is going to get into the organism, but somehow it has to get out. In us, the way we control our water intake is through osmosis. So we know that that's a type of diffusion where if the water is in greater concentration on one side of the cell, by diffusion it comes in, and then vice versa. Well, the ciliates have these sac-like organelles that expand and contract in order to squeeze the water out of the cell. So the contractile vacuoles are pretty unique to paramecium, and it's a way that they can control their water because they're aquatic. They're in water all the time. So when too much water comes in, these contractile vacuoles contract, the water is expelled out, and then more water can come in again. Now, as far as their reproduction, we did talk about how they can either be asexual or sexual reproducers. Excuse me, but ciliates are actually both. And I know this sounds kind of crazy, but if it's asexual reproduction, it's binary fission. They're just going to split in half, and each new daughter paramecium is going to be identical to the parent. If it is through sexual reproduction, the only type of sexual reproduction we talked about was conjugation, and that's where they transfer the information, the DNA in the micronucleus into the other paramecium, and that way there's going to be some genetic variability. Now, why would they reproduce both ways? This happens typically because in favorable conditions, when conditions are favorable for a paramecium, that means that they're in water. That means that there is a good food supply, that there's not a lot of predators. These are good conditions for a paramecium. They're going to reproduce asexually. They're just going to continue to reproduce. They're going to split in half by binary fission. All the offspring are going to be identical to the parent. But in harsh conditions, which would be not enough water, food source isn't available, a lot of predators, then they don't reproduce, and that means they sort of hold up and they reproduce sexually. We're going to run into this again when we get to fungi, because fungus do the same thing. In harsh conditions, they typically don't reproduce at a constant rate, and this is the way it is with the ciliates. So these paramecium are the most common of the ciliates. There's many more, but because this is the most common, this is the one I want you to know. They do have a small nucleus, the micronucleus, and the large nucleus, macro. The macro deals with metabolism and development. The small is dealing with conjugation, which is a sexual reproduction. They also have this tough layer called the pellicle, and that's where the cilia extend from. And there's a little depression called the oral groove. The oral groove is lined with cilia. The cilia beat back and forth, push the water into the mouth pore, into the sac-like gullet, where the food will move into a food vacuole to be digested. Once digested, the waste is going to exit through an anal pore. Their contractile vacuoles are dealing with water and the abundance. So when there's too much water, that contractile vacuole contracts, pushes it to the outside, and then it can start all over again. Cilia, I've said it before, but cilia is the quickest movement for these. You would actually think that maybe flagella would be, but it's not. Flagella and the amoeboid movement tend to be slower than cilia. And then again, through reproduction, they're asexual and sexual. If it's sexual, it has to be conjugation. If it's asexual, it's binary fission.